Good afternoon, I'm Katie Wilson and you are watching A News. Let's see your headlines. President Trump's doubling of steel and aluminium import tariffs sends shockwaves around the world. South Korea's newly elected president Lee Jae-Myung has officially taken office. The Turkic world's cultural footprint is honoured at a Berlin conference. The US is escalating its trade defences with a sharp increase in tariffs on key industrial metals. The move signals a renewed push by President Trump to prioritise domestic production, even at the risk of straining international economic ties.
In a sweeping move to bolster domestic industry, US President Donald Trump has signed an executive order doubling tariffs on steel and aluminium imports from 25% to 50%. The decision marks the second major hike since March and takes effect Wednesday. Trump says the measure is vital for protecting the American steel industry and reducing reliance on foreign suppliers. Speaking at a US steel factory rally, he argued that only high tariffs would force businesses to buy American.
If you don't have steel, you don't have a country. You don't have a country. You can't make a military. What are we going to do? Say, let's go to China to get our steel for the army tanks and for the boats and ships. A strong steel industry is not just a matter of dignity or prosperity and pride. It's above all a matter of national security, and it is.
But the announcement has stirred unease at home and abroad. Critics warn of steep consequences, higher costs for US manufacturers, potential retaliation from trade partners, and deeper disruption to global supply chains. Some affected firms expressed disbelief that the policy was going ahead, hoping it might be a bluff or bargaining tactic. The UK, however, secured a partial exemption. Its tariffs remain at 25% amid ongoing trade talks with Washington. Meanwhile, the US, already the world's largest steel importer after the EU, sources much of its metal from countries like Canada, Brazil and South Korea. This latest move reverses earlier carve-outs and exemptions Trump deemed too lenient. Though imports and US production levels had remained relatively stable in recent months, April saw a 17% drop in steel imports. Industry watchers now expect an even sharper decline. Canada and the EU are reportedly readying counter-tariffs in response.
Well, President Trump's decision to double tariffs on steel and aluminium is already sending shockwaves around the world. The countries impacted are not staying quiet, with sharp responses from both Brazil and the European Union.
It's breaking up rapidly.
President Trump's decision to double tariffs on imported steel and aluminium has triggered warnings around the world, with some of America's closest trading partners already preparing to push back.
So, my position on the issue of trade, on the tariff that was imposed on Brazil, the direction we have is as follows. First, we're going to try to spend as much time as possible negotiating. Secondly, if there's no agreement, we'll go to the World Trade Organization or we'll decide to have reciprocity.
In Europe, the EU's trade chief called the decision counterproductive and warned that talks with Washington could suffer.
We strongly regret this latest US decision, and I explained to him that it clearly doesn't help the ongoing negotiations, especially as we are making progress.
Brussels says it's preparing for possible countermeasures, but for now, it remains at the table.
More than 200 wildfires are raging across Canada, prompting mass evacuations and deteriorating air quality, with smoke even reaching parts of the US Midwest.
Canada is facing a severe wildfire crisis, with over 200 active fires across Saskatchewan, Manitoba and Alberta. Among these, 106 are classified as out of control, leading to the evacuation of more than 27,000 residents. In Saskatchewan, the situation is particularly dire, with fires expanding to hundreds of thousands of hectares, breaching the La Ronge airport and affecting thousands of people.
It has impacted, like with children, being able to go to sports practices, events getting canceled and things like that. We haven't seen it yet with these wildfires, but I think it's coming probably even today.
The smoke from these wildfires has not been confined to Canada. It has drifted southward, causing hazardous air quality in the US Midwest. Minnesota issued its first ever maroon air quality alert, indicating very unhealthy conditions. The smoke has also reached as far as Cincinnati, Ohio, and even parts of Europe. Health officials are urging residents in affected areas to limit outdoor activities and use respirators when necessary. So far, 1.9 million hectares have burned in 3 provinces of Canada. Experts attribute the severity of these wildfires to prolonged drought and high temperatures, conditions exacerbated by climate change. They warn that such extreme weather events are likely to become more frequent, underscoring the need for comprehensive wildfire management and climate mitigation strategies.
Despite renewed efforts towards peace talks, Russia continues its strikes on Ukraine. In the past 24 hours, strikes across multiple regions have killed at least 7 civilians and left more than 50 injured. Overnight, Russian forces launched 95 drones and decoy aircraft across several Ukrainian regions. Ukraine's Air Force says it downed 61 of them. Kharkiv was hit the hardest. The mayor says 2 missiles and 9 drones struck the city, injuring a 30-year-old man and destroying a private home. In Sumy, a Russian drone strike damaged warehouses and civilian vehicles, injuring 1 person. The blast left a crater in a residential area, but firefighters managed to contain the fires despite ongoing shelling. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says half of the planes damaged in the attack on Russia cannot be repaired. Ukraine says it hit 41 Russian military aircraft during Operation Spiderweb. That's a series of drone attacks on air bases deep in Russian territory over the weekend. The Kremlin said a formal investigation was launched.
The Kremlin has launched a formal investigation into a series of Ukrainian drone attacks that struck multiple Russian military airfields over the weekend, one of the most damaging operations of the war so far. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said President Vladimir Putin had been kept updated in real time and that official inquiries are now underway.
An investigation is ongoing. The president was informed as events unfolded. I suggest waiting for the results of that investigation.
The attacks claimed by Ukraine's domestic security service, the SBU, reportedly hit 4 air bases and damaged 41 aircrafts. Ukraine says the drones were launched from inside Russian territory, concealed in wooden sheds near the bases, part of an operation over a year in the making.
The operation was prepared for over a year and a half. Planning and details were perfect. The drones launched from sites near Russian FSB departments.
Footage shared by Ukrainian officials shows drones packed into containers, then launched remotely as roofing panels lifted off. The strikes came the same day as a separate deadly incident, a train derailment in Russia's Bryansk region that killed at least 7. Russia says a bridge was blown up while a passenger train was passing. A rail bridge in nearby Kursk also collapsed. No one has claimed responsibility. And while Ukraine views the strikes as a precision blow against Russia's long-range threat, Moscow is now focused on uncovering how such a coordinated assault reached so deep inside its territory. The outcome of the Kremlin's investigation could shape how Russia responds, militarily and politically, in the days to come.
South Korea's newly elected president, Lee Jae-Myung, has officially taken office following a scaled-down inauguration ceremony in Seoul today. His swearing-in comes just a day after winning a snap election, signalling a major political shift in the country's leadership.
Lee Jae-Myung was officially sworn in as South Korea's 21st president on Wednesday during a scaled-down inauguration ceremony held at the National Assembly in Seoul. The 61-year-old former human rights lawyer takes office after winning Tuesday's snap election with 49% of the vote. He defeated Kim Moon-soo of the Conservative People Power Party, who secured 41%, signalling a major liberal shift following the ousting of former President Yoon Suk-yeol. The election was called amid widespread public backlash over Yoon's attempt to impose martial law.
I solemnly swear before the people that I will faithfully carry out my duties as President by upholding the Constitution, defending the nation, striving for the peaceful reunification of the homeland, promoting the freedom and welfare of the people, and advancing our national culture.
Following his oath of office, President Lee outlined his administration's priorities, vowing to restore democracy, rebuild the economy, and ensure national security through dialogue and strong alliances. Conservative challenger Kim Moon-soo conceded defeat early Wednesday, offering his congratulations to the new president.
I humbly accept the will of the people. I extend my congratulations to candidate Lee Jae-Myung. I will never forget the overwhelming support and encouragement the people have given me.
Thousands of Lee's supporters gathered in central Seoul late into the night to celebrate the victory. As Lee begins his 5-year term, the nation watches closely, hopeful that his leadership will bring stability, unity, and renewed momentum to South Korea's future.
Well, the new South Korean president named a new prime minister in top cabinet positions during a news conference at the presidential office. Lee nominated Kim Min-suk, a lawmaker from the Democratic Party, as prime minister. He also tapped the former unification minister Lee Jong-suk to lead the National Intelligence Service, and Kang Hoon-sik, a fellow Democratic Party lawmaker, as presidential chief of staff. The president said the selections reflect his priorities of economic growth, national unity and lasting peace on the Korean peninsula. Aid distribution centres in Gaza were shut down for the day after dozens were killed near a US-backed site. The Israeli army now considers the roads to these locations as active combat zones.
Aid delivery in Gaza was suspended on Wednesday after at least 27 Palestinians were reported killed near a food distribution site in Rafah. The deaths, confirmed by Gaza's Hamas-run civil defense agency and the International Committee of the Red Cross, followed days of violence around US-backed aid centers. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF, which is supported by the US and Israel, said the one-day closure was for logistical improvements. But the Israeli military declared roads to the centers combat zones and prohibited civilian access. According to the Israeli army, its troops opened fire on individuals it described as suspects who left designated access routes near the aid site. It did not confirm directly targeting civilians, but hospitals in the area reported gunshot wounds among those injured while waiting for aid. Aid workers and witnesses described the scene as chaotic, with no crowd control or ID checks. This was the third such incident in as many days. Previous clashes on Sunday and Monday also left dozens dead, according to UN monitors and local authorities. The GHF, which began operations last week, runs its own distribution system outside of the UN network. It relies on US contractors to manage secure centers inside Israeli-controlled zones. Critics say the model is unsafe and forces civilians to walk long distances through conflict areas to collect food. The UN and other humanitarian groups have refused to work with the foundation, calling the approach unaccountable and dangerous. UN officials said the current setup puts lives at risk and described it as a model for how not to deliver aid. Despite growing concern, Israel insists the GHF allows aid to reach civilians while avoiding diversion by Hamas. The foundation claims it has delivered over 7 million meals so far. The United Nations Security Council is also expected to vote on a resolution demanding an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, along with unrestricted humanitarian access. The draft calls for the release of all hostages and the lifting of all restrictions on aid delivery. It remains unclear whether the US will back the resolution or use its veto.
This is a deliberate denial of...
An increasing number of pro-Palestinian protests are erupting across the UK, particularly in London, to to discuss the latest, we are joined by political analyst Philip Chern. Thank you for being with us. Now, what could the real world impact be in terms of these latest wave of protests on the UK government's policy towards Israel?
Well, it's interesting, the timing of these particular protests, because we're midweek. You might think, well, what are we doing having a big protest on a Wednesday? Well, it coincides with a bill that's being introduced by Jeremy Corbyn. Now, Jeremy Corbyn was previously the leader of the now ruling Labour Party. He's now independent. But that is to introduce an inquiry into British government's involvement in what's going on in Israel, because there has been a lot of concern, and this is what a lot of the protests are about how complicit the British government has been in some of the activities that have been going on there. So this particular bill that's being introduced is to call for the truth regarding the role of any British military bases in Cyprus. It's to call for widespread openness about just how much is going on regarding the British government there. We know, for example, that the British government is actually still sending parts for F-35 jet fighters, along with a number of other arms exporters and other issues to do with that. We know, for example, statistically, that just in the last quarter of last year, between October and December alone, the Labour government approved more arms export licenses to Israel than in the whole of the period between 2020 and 23. So the actual impact of them is to raise awareness of that, and to raise awareness of this particular bill that Jeremy Corbyn is actually trying to bring through the actual Parliament as we speak. It's not the only one. As you say, there have been protests across most major towns and cities in the last few months. Indeed, since October the 7th incident actually started off, but they've grown, they've been bigger, and in many cases they've been much more vocal.
And in terms of diplomatic leverage for the UK, what impact could these protests have, or any outcomes from these protests?
One of the major things, and it is one of the things that the protesters have been calling for, is for Keir Starmer to take a much stronger stance, for the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, to take a much stronger stance against Israel. A couple of weeks ago, they did say that trade negotiations were going to be stalled as a result of this, but there still is a certain amount of liaison on the military side, and also to do with the exchange of goods and intelligence between Britain and Israel. So there are calls for that to stop, and that could indeed be one of the issues. Keir Starmer has already said that he's going to consider further actions against Israel, including possible sanctions. We don't know exactly what level those will be. There's already been a vocal opposition to settler violence, and recently an expanded military campaign in Gaza. So there has been, it's frozen its free trade agreement talks with Israel. So, but the protests say, look, we welcome that. We think to ourselves, well, that's going to make some sort of difference, but it's not going to change the overall pattern. And there is a move, not just in the UK, but across many European countries as well, to take a much stronger stance, to call for, a full set of boycotts, divestment, and actually to cut off many of the very considerable ties that exist between the two. So these are things that could be done. It's diplomatically very difficult, but it's not impossible, and certainly Britain is not alone in considering many of those options.
Certainly one to watch, isn't it? Thank you so much for joining us on the programme. The 30th Energy Forum held in Baku has concluded. Over the course of 3 days, the most pressing issues on the global energy agenda were discussed. The forum once again highlighted Azerbaijan's position in the global energy dialogue.
The 30th anniversary Baku Energy Forum has ended. For 3 days, Baku became a key centre for global energy talks. Participants discussed everything from climate policy to new technologies. After COP29, the event showed Azerbaijan's rising role in climate and energy diplomacy. Holding the forum during global uncertainty made it even more important, helping to strengthen international cooperation.
So we already see a good progress with Azerbaijan business, with the private businesses who invest in Azerbaijan, developing the infrastructural projects, developing the renewable projects, going into the advanced solutions such as biomethane, for instance, and the other green solutions important for this market.
Innovation wasn't just about technology. Important energy projects were also highlighted. For example, ACWA Power presented the Zizi Absheron wind power plant, with the first 80 megawatts expected to start working in August.
Currently, Aquapower is the biggest private desalination water company in the world with 9.5 million cubic meters per day generation. And we would like to bring this expertise to this region because not only energy security is important with the climate change, water security is as important as energy security, and we would like to bring our expertise to Azerbaijan and further on to the region in our water desalination. Furthermore, we would like to develop more projects in Azerbaijan in wind, offshore, and solar and battery storage projects. As to the region, in Uzbekistan, we have been working extensively.
SOCAR is also focusing on renewable energy. The company plans to use new battery technologies based on sodium ion and vanadium, which are more flexible and eco-friendly. At the same time, Azerbaijan's natural gas exports to Europe are growing. So far, 47 billion cubic metres of gas have been sent through the Trans-Adriatic pipeline. 39 billion of that to Italy. BP highlighted digitalisation as key to safer and more efficient energy production, with the Azeri Central East platform showcasing the latest technologies. After 3 days of active discussions, participants are leaving Baku with fresh ideas and new partnerships. The 30th Baku Energy Forum showed that Azerbaijan remains a leader in energy transformation and is moving confidently toward a greener future.
The second day of the Imperial Structure, Colonial Ideologies and Realities conference took place in Baku with lectures at ADA University and the University of Languages. The challenges of regions like the Caribbean and Africa were highlighted, including their limited control over their own resources and systems. Speakers highlighted how colonial thinking still shapes today's world, and the event ended with calls for better legal tools and stronger global cooperation to end colonial practices.
Currently, and that is
the current arrangements, colonial arrangements in the world, including those governed by the French, the Dutch, the British, the French, of course, again, the United States and others, are all now being redefined, and we are seeking to promote the decolonization of these territories to bring them to the full measure of self-government according to the United Nations Charter.
Most of the remaining colonial territories are relatively small, and they're considered relatively insignificant. So the lobbying or the interest, the power that the people of those territories have is relatively limited, which is different from earlier periods when, for example, in the African and Asian countries, these were like big populations that were like big spots on the map. So there was more international attention to that. I think the fact that colonialism now is mainly limited to small island territories just makes them, I guess, less prominent in international affairs. So that's one obstacle, just the kind of visibility that's often limited of these territories.
The UN is warning of a worsening humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan as international aid remains frozen. It says $145 million in food aid projects are now at risk of being suspended.
the United Nations is raising serious concerns about the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan as international aid to the country remains suspended. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says the funding freeze will force the suspension of $145 million worth of aid projects, most of them focused on food assistance. According to OCHA, the aid would also lead to the closure of more than 420 health centers and 298 nutrition centers, cutting off essential services to millions across the country. While nearly 23 million Afghans need humanitarian support this year, OCHA says it can only reach 16.8 million under current funding levels. The agency is now appealing for $2.42 billion to meet the full scale of the country's needs. In response to the growing crisis, the UN Security Council has announced a meeting for June 23rd. The session will include briefings from Rosa Atunbayeva, the UN Secretary General's Special Representative for Afghanistan, and senior officials from the UN Women and OCHA. The meeting will feature an open briefing followed by closed consultation as part of the Council's regular quarterly review on Afghanistan. With millions at risk, the outcome of the meeting could be crucial for Afghanistan's humanitarian future. This is Tamim Bahiz in Kabul for A News.
Georgia has launched its first modern dry port near Tbilisi, aiming to boost trade and strengthen its role as a regional transit hub. Our correspondent Nini Nikolaishvili has more from Tbilisi.
Georgia has officially launched the Tbilisi Dry Port project, the first modern rail-based container and freight terminal in the region. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze announced its opening, calling it a major step in strengthening trade across the Caucasus and Central Asia. The dry port is being built in 3 phases covering 28.5 hectares. The first phase, already completed, will handle 100,000 containers annually. Once they're fully completed, the capacity will double to 200,000 containers. Located near Azerbaijan, Armenia and Tbilisi International Airport with direct links to highways and national railways, the port is expected to become one of the most efficient logistics centers in the region. It will serve not only Georgian port cities like Batumi, Poti or Plain-Danak Port, but as a hub for international shipping, especially for cargoes coming from China and Far East via the Middle Corridor. The project is a partnership of the United Arab Emirates Abu Dhabi Port Group, Norway's Wilhelmsman Port Services and local company Iveco. According to the Prime Minister, Tbilisi Dry Port will boost Georgia's connectivity, strengthen its transit role and support economic growth while turning the country into a key regional hub. It's Nini Nikolaishvili reporting from Tbilisi, A News.
Well, the rich cultural and scientific legacy of the Turkic world took centre stage in Berlin at a special conference highlighting its contributions to global heritage. The event brought together scholars, diplomats and artists to showcase the depth and diversity of Turkic nations.
The rich cultural and scientific heritage of the Turkic world was presented to the international community at the conference titled Contributions of the Turkic World to World Science and Culture, held in Berlin, the capital of Germany. Organized under the auspices of the International Organization of Turkic Culture, Turksoy, and with the cooperation of the embassies of Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan and Turkey, the conference was supported by the Turkish Cooperation and Coordination Agency and the Yunus Emre Institute. Held at the Azerbaijan Cultural Center in Berlin, the event featured a high-level opening session, scholarly panels, a traditional art exhibition, and performances of Turkic music. Speaking at the opening ceremony, Turksoy Secretary General Sultan Raif said the gathering in Berlin was more than a retrospective. It was about revitalizing the cultural bridge that connects the past with the future. Raif noted that generations from the Turkic geography have enriched human history with intellect, spirit, and aesthetic sensibility. He underscored the significance of Divani Lugati Türk, authored by Kashgarlı Mahmud, describing it not merely as a dictionary, but as a cultural atlas. The goal of the conference was not only to highlight the cultural and scientific contributions of the Turkic world, but also to reintroduce its shared heritage to an international audience from a fresh perspective.
That's all we have for now. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.